Hello, and welcome to Advantage Capital's webinar, a 360-degree look at growing small business in a COVID-19 world. My name is Mark Shuffle with Advantage, and before we start today's remarks from our panelists, I would like to review some technical details for our attendees. This webcast is a live video event and is being recorded. Following the event, please look for an email with a link to that recording. You'll be able to rewatch the webinar later this week at Advantage Capital's website. Throughout today's webcast, we encourage you to send in your questions via the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen. You will be able to rewatch the webinar and those questions at a later time. We're reserving some time at the end of this webinar to take some of those questions. Before jumping into today's discussion, we'd like to get to know our audience a little better with a few poll questions. First of all, what region of the country are you from? The Northeast, the Midwest, the South, or the West? Please respond. We've got a good showing today, and today we're going to tally those and let you know where y'all are from. Well, it looks like we've got a good representation throughout the entire country with a particular strong showing from the Midwest this morning. Thank you for responding. We're going to do one more set of questions for you, and that is, what type of organization do you represent? A local or state governmental agency, legislative branch, be it federal or state, a quasi-public agency or nonprofit agency, consulting or lobbying firm, or something else if we haven't found your area, or a small business, please let us know. Please respond. Great, we've got a broad representation in today's attendees with particular strong showing from the consulting or lobbying firm group. Not a surprise there. Thank you for participating. And now, onto our team of panelists. I'd like to welcome for today's panel discussion, Lee Langerock with Prep the Page, Ed Johnson with Bamboo Utility Media, Kerwin Tesdell with Community Development Venture Capital Alliance, and Salin Givargis with SSG Insight and Mixed Income Strategic Alliance. And our first speaker today, and also serving as our moderator, is Sandra M. Moore, the Chief Impact Officer at Advantage Capital. Sandra is a community development expert with over 30 years of experience across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, designing, implementing, evaluating, and financing revitalization programs in areas facing economic and social distress. Welcome, Sandra, and I will now pass the controls over to you for today's discussion.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to our panel of experts for joining us today. Of course, thank you to all who joined in the conversation with us today. Let me frame our discussion, just a few points. The statistics are grim, folks. In just 2 months' time, more than 100,000 small businesses permanently closed their doors between March and early May. The Great Recession claimed approximately 170,000 businesses more, but over a 2-year time period, not 2 months. More than 1/3 of business owners surveyed now say that they are delaying payment or paying reduced rent, as the federal funds aren't designed very well to help very small businesses with large overhead. Think about the enormity of the COVID-19's financial effect on individual workers and households. Unemployment rose higher in 3 months of COVID-19 than it did in 2 years of the Great Recession. With the sharp decline in labor force participation, the COVID-19 recession is comparable to the Great Depression when unemployment hit 25%. Job and wage losses have hit households hard, folks. With Hispanic Americans and African Americans especially hard hits, 61% of Hispanic Americans say they or someone in their household experienced job or wage loss due to the outbreak. 44% of Black adults and 38% of white adults say the same. At least 47% of all those surveyed said they did not have financial reserves to cover an emergency. This research is done not by Advantage Capital, but rather by the August Pew Research Organization. If the current statistics weren't dire enough, all we have to do is look at the past to see what happens with this kind of distress to the least among us. Between 2010 and 2014, 14 million people lived in extremely poor neighborhoods, 5 million more than before that Great Recession. With the COVID-19 shock to our economy, states and state budgets are severely impacted. Revenues plummeting, while expenses related to social services and just basic human service delivery are rising. Early estimates say that state budgets will have shortfalls that reach almost 10% in the current fiscal year, and maybe up to 25% in 2021. Again, a dire set of situations. And now at least 40 states continue record-growing numbers of new cases of the virus daily, prompting worries of another shutdown. We know that aggressive action must be taken. We know that stabilizing businesses, anchoring them, and freeing up capital for those that can to grow, pushing in capital for new businesses or business lines, this is a significant set of cogs in the 360-degree wheel of recovery. This is where revenue for the states will come from. This is where wages for the workers will come from. This is how the multiplier effect related to businesses growing, opening and growing will happen. But the recovery plan can't be narrow. We must come out of this with a complete lifeline at the end, avoiding the spottiness and disparities that we've seen in past recovery. There is lots going on around the country, but an example is the proposed California Jumpstart Act. That proposed legislation builds a public-private partnership and facilitates investment of private capital into California small businesses, really small businesses, 250 or less employees, in high unemployment areas where high poverty exists, where low wage jobs are the standard, in rural areas. In other words, folks, targeted, specific, laser focused, comprehensive action. That is our way out. That's the framing. I wish I could draw a prettier picture frame around it, but I cannot. I am now going to turn to the panelists to give you part of that, their parts of the 360-degree view. Starting with Lee. Lee's a partner at Prep the Page. She's a connector for communities and resources and a promoter of the productive support that directly benefits businesses and economic development, and she didn't start doing this yesterday. She has a decades-long career in service-based program development and management focused on building local economies in rural and suburban areas, those particularly with low incomes. She knows how to do that. Lee, thanks for joining us on the panel today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sandy and the Advantage Capital Group, thank you so much for having us participate in the panel discussion today, for inviting Prep the Page to be here. We greatly appreciate the audience for joining us as well in this very interesting and serious perspective on what's going on. We've had economic downturn before. We've seen that and understand that. And as Sandy said, I've been around a little bit to have worked with and for small business and communities in this. The challenge today is not only is it an economic recovery or an economic downturn, it's also a public health. It's majorly a public health. So we have to be driven by public health and then respond to our economic climate. And in doing that, most particularly in rural areas that are affected, that public health, those rural areas have some particular challenges. But before, when we look at business and we look at rural and we look at those disadvantaged communities, regardless whether they're rural or urban or suburban, this is a dynamic effect across small business, agribusiness, manufacturing, healthcare, in government. When you talk about rural community, a predominant employer within your communities is government. So whether that's education, whether that's municipal, or if it's federal agencies, those are all impacted, and we've seen that impact across the board. When we talk about rural business challenges, and we talk about the challenges related to this particular pandemic and what we're doing as a nation to help shore up small business, one of the things that has come to life for any type of business, one of the things that's come to life has been really that capital reserve, or that lack of capital reserve, and challenges that we have in looking at our productivity. And when you talk about rural business, particularly, some of those challenges are, there's an assessor's term called locational obsolescence. And what that challenge means, or what that term means, is that you just are locationally isolated. So one of the big challenges within this, and one of the opportunities that we have to learn as small business, as government, as those that serve, is to help business and help community with connectivity. One of the key elements of that is making sure that we plan, and making sure that we provide the ability to help communicate, make sure that the technology is effective, that we work, that if you are a firm that can work remotely, that you have the ability to do so. And when we look at locational obsolescence, it's also transportation of goods. So when we're talking about transportation of goods, one of the things we've seen, and when you're talking about 20% of the US economy's manufacturing is in rural areas, when we talk about transportation of goods, what we've seen across the board is actually also a disconnect with supply lines, a delay in supply, and a delay in transportation. And so those challenges, and being able to address those and adapt those, especially when we talk about that business longevity and the ability for communities to support small business, that's a particular challenge is when we look at that. When we talk about access to markets, so as municipal, as government officials, as service providers that help build program to develop small business, we've got to look at all of the elements related to that. And it all comes down to, and in good part, into planning and making sure that you're looking from an organizational perspective and operational perspective, that you're looking at what's risk. And I think for all of us, what we're hearing across the board when we talk about risk assessment is the unknown. We don't really know what the longevity of this. I think that's part of your employee frustration. It's part of your community frustration when you're managing public safety and public health. We don't know the longevity. We don't know the next step in this. So understanding from a municipal perspective and an operational perspective, what your risk is, and your operational risk, and your efficiencies, and where you can really define and identify where that business capital comes from, and how you can utilize that in an appropriate way, whether it's short-term capital or whether it's longer term, as you look at that. One of the great strengths of rural community in a predominant way is your workforce. So your workforce is dedicated. You're seeing that employee pre-COVID, you were seeing that employee at ball games. You were seeing that employee at the grocery store. You're seeing that employee in a social area. Now that we have social distancing and some isolation, you're seeing that employee in the business setting, but they're showing up and they want to help and they want to participate. So being able to have a good communications plan with your employment base, being able to, as a municipality, to make sure that you have good communications and that you are straightforward in what you're seeing and the decisions that you make, being able to critically think through processes is just key. And then when you talk about connectivity and you talk about communications, just making sure you manage that expectation. And when we look again at not only the economic impact of this, but also the public health impact of this, you've got to identify whether it's the municipal or whether it's the business. You've got to identify that authority that's beyond you. So what I mean by that is, look at your county health departments. They're going to be issuing those mandates and you're going to be following those. So one of the challenges that we've seen throughout this process that is new to all of us is the mandates that have come down and being able to be agile enough to provide some guidance to the employees that we have and the people that we have. And so when we talk about that bridge that Sandy was talking about, the bridge to finance, especially in distressed areas, and when you talk about rural areas, there are less reserves, there are less resources in rural areas than there are in highly urban or highly populated. Yes.
Just a reminder, you're into your 1 minute.
Oh, fantastic. So I would say that as you're looking at this, planning is key, making sure that you're communicating. When you look at that capital reserve, look at your short-term and long-term, and then understand from a service perspective that dynamic of having some latitude with businesses for that public and that private partnership and the allowance of capital in there. And as an owner, just making sure that you are real with yourself and understanding how you can grow and look at dynamic markets to see where opportunity is. And again, I want to thank you. Thanks, Advantage, for allowing me to participate.
Thank you very much, Lee. Key points that you've made, drawing our attention, of course, to rural America, because sometimes we can move forward in America and forget that we have to look comprehensively across our geography. That is going to take us to our next speaker, Ed Johnson. Ed is an economic development executive, Florida native, and founder and CEO of Bamboo Tilly Media, global consultancy company focused on leadership and management, communications, marketing, supply chain strategies, critical matter right at these times, and strategic sales and operations across a myriad of sectors. Ed's been in digital health, defense, sustainable energy, clean tech, and pharmaceuticals. Ed's got decades of experience consulting with both domestic and international clients. Ed, thanks for joining us today. Look for your 1 minute, 2 minute reminder in your chat box.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandy. It's great being here. And just get right to the point. I know that one of the questions that was posed was about the consolidation of small businesses into larger businesses. I think we got a question about a local restaurant having to close, and that the local Chili's was continuing to survive. And can this be stopped? How do you help the smaller businesses? And I often grapple with that. Obviously, I've worked with large corporations, but I've also run my own businesses, and I've always had to compete with larger businesses. And I think there's some common best practices that smaller businesses can do during good and bad times. And I will say that in my preparation for this call, I was thinking about this, and really during every economic contraction, there's always a consolidation. There's always a consolidation of smaller businesses into larger businesses going out as well. But let's talk about, I think, some of the advantages that the small businesses have. I think if you watch any commercials today on the internet or on television, you'll see that your large businesses are trying to be like small businesses. Isn't that kind of interesting? They're trying to give the personal service. They're trying to say they know your name. They're trying to be nimble and quick. And that's really small business DNA. And I think that's where the smaller businesses have to start. And I'll give you some idea. Since a restaurant was mentioned in my question, I know that in Metro Orlando, not far from where I live, there were two local restaurants that have survived and thrived during the pandemic. One of them is called the Avalon Diner, and the other one is called Country House. These businesses are located in an MSA that has a Chili's, all the big brand restaurants that you can imagine. But what these restaurants have done, and I find it quite interesting that this is what really any small business should do, is that they provided something that your larger businesses don't have. And the largest businesses are trying to convey to us that they do have. And those things are, they created a unique atmosphere, right? They created an atmosphere that was more family oriented, gave us a place that where you can feel safe and comfortable. It didn't have to be a huge dining room. It was a small, nimble, unique type of atmosphere where I could have a business meeting. I could meet with family members. It's just really interesting how both of these diners have continued to provide that type of service. But also when we come down to, I think, the financial side, right? The larger businesses and the smaller businesses have had struggles. Give you a case in point. One of my closest friends is the senior vice president of finance for Red Lobster. I called him about 2.5 months ago. We check in with each other about once a month, and I wanted to know how he was doing. And I called him the day that he was furloughing 50,000 employees. It was not a good day for him. Their business was down 95%. This is a major multi-billion-dollar corporation. So of course, the smaller businesses also had some challenges. I spoke with him about 3 weeks ago, and their business was up 75% at Red Lobster, and they were starting to bring a lot of their employees back. Now, to the smaller businesses that thrived, what did they do besides provide a great atmosphere? Certainly on the fiscal side, they streamlined their menu. They streamlined their service offering. They got into their supply chain, and they said, okay, what really do we need and what don't we need? What will our customers, what are the most common things they like and what don't they like? So they streamlined their operations, not just in personnel, but they streamlined mainly in their supply chain and in their menu side. This allowed them to be a lot more nimble. If you can imagine how difficult it would have been for a Red Lobster to streamline their menu. I mean, with the large businesses, some of the disadvantages that they have is that they've got committees, they've got teams, they've got investors, they've got boards, and it slows down their competitiveness. So I would say that if you're a small business, focus on your uniqueness, whatever service or product that you have to offer. If you have an atmosphere, I mean, if we think about Starbucks and how Starbucks started, I mean, Starbucks basically takes, they used to take 10 cents worth of ingredients and charge $3 for it or $4 for it. But what they created was an atmosphere for people to be able to meet, to be comfortable and so on and so forth. And it blossomed into a multi-billion-dollar operation. So I would say that for small businesses, stay small. Bring that uniqueness that you have in your offering, your products and services, and don't forget that unique customer service, because some of the people that are in these small diners that I have gone to and I still go to is because of the people. Went back because of the people, and you don't get that with a lot of your larger corporations. You've got people coming in and out all of the time. It's just like larger banks. I have an account with one of the largest banks in the country, and every time I go into a branch, there's a new person, and they don't know me. Then I have to, so I say, if you're unique, you're small, do what you do well. Stay small, nimble, unique in your service offering. And I think, and also look at your supply chain. Make sure you are very good on your fiscal responsibilities as well. And I think you can make it through if you have something that's unique that no one else has. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
There's a little note down there telling me that I'm muted, but I'm no longer muted. Thank you, Ed. Very good comments, very good observations about doing what you do and continuing to do it well. If time allows, we'll circle back to you and have you talk to us a little bit about what you want us to think about with regard to underemployed folks in a community. That's going to take us right over to Kerwin, our next speaker. Kerwin has been focused on new ways to drive capital to low-income communities for the past 20 years. Kerwin is president of the Community Development Venture Capital Alliance. Not used to saying that. We refer to it as CDVCA, a network for community development venture capital investing. CDVCA uses the availability of startup and growth risk capital for businesses to create good jobs, productive wealth, entrepreneurial capacity in distressed communities, or like now, in distressed times. Kerwin, thank you very much for joining us, and I turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Sandy. And as Sandy said, my whole business is thinking about how to use capital, particularly risk capital, to help businesses grow, help businesses start, help create new activity, new business activity. And so that's sort of the lens that I bring to this discussion. Sandy, you asked me to address, not just the current crisis, but what are things going to look like 5, 10 years from now, and how should we be thinking about that? And I appreciate that question. I think it's tremendously important because, right now, we're in crisis mode, right? If you're a state legislator, you've got people coming to your office who have lost their jobs, their businesses are going under, they're firing 50 people, and you want to respond to that. And that's what we're doing with things like the PPP loans. And that's tremendously important to respond to that real human need. We're moving on now to a following stage where, unfortunately, a lot of those businesses are just going under and they're not going to come back. So the question is, where are the jobs in the future going to come from? And the natural reaction, I think, is to say, well, we had these businesses in the past doing this thing, producing such and such product. We're going to help create some new businesses that are going to create that are going to produce that product in the same way that our past businesses were producing that product. And we're going to, sort of help build what we had before to rebuild our employment base and our business base. Again, natural inclination, important inclination. But I'd like to suggest a third way of thinking, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive. A third way of thinking, which is, I think we're going to have a very different economy 5, 10 years from now from what we had before. I think all of us on the panel, I see a fair amount of gray hair here. All of us lived through the recession of 2008, 2010. That was really a financial crisis, and therefore it did make sense to try to just sort of jumpstart the economy and rebuild where we were before. This crisis that we're in, I think, is a real life-changing and economy-changing crisis. And therefore, I think the challenge and perhaps the opportunity is to think about how can we rebuild different and better in the future. How can we think about opportunities that companies may have in the future to rebuild for a different environment? And I'll just mention one example that I happen to be dealing with right now. We have an investment in a company that makes hardware, trailer hitches, things like that for recreational vehicles. Not a company that you'd think of right away. You'd think about a company that manufactures drones to deliver packages as the kind of company that would be in a growth path right now. But think about what RVs are, right? You take your house and you put it on your car and you travel around with it. And all this pent-up demand now to go out and go on vacation and get out of your home. RVs are a great way to do it. You don't have to expose yourself to the virus in hotels. So, this example isn't going to change the world, but I think it's an important example on the ground. Manufacturing company in rural Nebraska, supplying a lot of good jobs for underemployed people there, And with the right kind of capital at this moment, that company has the opportunity to expand significantly and soak up some of the underemployment and job loss in their very low income rural areas. So I think that's the kind of thinking we need to undertake, is what is this economy going to look like in the future, and how do we fuel the startup and growth of businesses that are going to fit into that new picture. And I think there's an opportunity here. I think, for example, we may have a group of business owners that aren't quite so white and quite so male as business owners are today. We may have opportunities to build more of a local economy, whether that's sort of middle of the country versus coast, whether that's U.S. versus the rest of the world. I think there's going to be a real push and a real value to local business if localities are smart about supporting that the growth of those kinds of businesses. So I think we want to think about, on the policy level, creating strong local economies, strong local businesses, supported by a strong, innovative, flexible finance system. That's what I had to say, Sandy. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Kerwin, for that. And I'm gonna just put on your mind that I may circle back to you to talk just a little bit about how one gets to that innovative thinking in such a distressing time, and such a time that requires so much immediate focus on the now. I'm sure you've got a few hints for us there. This brings us up, folks, to our final speaker, and everyone's doing great on time, so we'll have a few minutes for open questions. And our final speaker today is Sandra Geevarghese. Sandra's career has been dedicated to the pursuit of greater equity, greater opportunity, greater inclusion for low-income persons and others often left behind across the geography of America. And while he's looked at it from the perspective of people, he couldn't possibly see that without looking at it from the perspective of businesses and business growth and business opportunity, government, philanthropy, and the totality of the components that it takes in our society for things to work. He's currently president and CEO of SGG Inside, a consulting firm offering comprehensive services to public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sector leaders and organizations. He also serves as a senior fellow at the Center for the Study of Social Policy and is the founding director of the Mixed Income Strategic Alliance. Sandra, welcome. You're gonna bring us home.
Thank you, Sandy. It's wonderful to be with all of you today. And I want to give kudos to Sandy and the Advantage Capital Group. It's important, as they do, to invest in small businesses during these times, but its advantages, commitment to capacity building and providing knowledge and expertise, evidenced by this webinar, that is really critical. And I hope to offer some insight today. I've had the pleasure, and Sandy mentioned that, to work on the issues of equity in place and access to opportunity for years from virtually every sector. I had the fortune of working in leadership in the Obama administration and the distinct honor of working on several of the flagship place-based initiatives for which job creation, small business, and entrepreneurial activity figured prominently. And we took much inspiration from previous work as we constructed policy, designed programs, and built practice. In fact, back in 2008, the federal government was probably late to focus on, as Sandy has already mentioned, integrated, comprehensive solutions in places. And I want to speak to you today from the perspective of those comprehensive solutions and give you some things to think about, particularly as private sector and small businesses engage the public sector. First, I encourage you to leverage all tools, relationships, and assets. It's an all hands on deck enterprise. I believe that cross-sector partnerships are key to success. No one actor possesses the resources or authority to solve the challenges we're talking about today. given the enormity of the challenges that we face. And you may be looking, even in this webinar, for a silver bullet, and I don't think any of us are going to offer it today. Secondly, think about policy silos in terms of your challenge that you're trying to seek, and commit yourself to being a silo buster. What do I mean by that? No one agency in the public sector has authority over your issues. You are specialized as a small business, and the public sector actors are specialized as well. And getting accustomed to that specialization, I think, is going to be important. Next, public sector actors operate from an interconnected web of policies that contribute to success. Government is increasingly trying to work across its various instruments. And I would encourage you to encourage government to work better together for you. Another issue is data and evidence. Collect and keep track as much as possible, particularly for those of you who are in receipt of PPP. Collect and keep track of your data. Data is leverage for policy change. Without it, we're going to be hamstrung. So be thinking about that. Think about your places, and we've already talked about that, as an organizing construct for action and targeting. Government constructs its initiatives at virtually every scale of place, from neighborhood to city to region. There is a program and initiative for you. And I would encourage you to lean into the place where you do business and where you're located. We heard Ed talk about that, and Kerwin and Lee as well, and where you have the opportunity to create new markets. Leverage partnerships within those places, and when you get the chance, speak about those partnerships. Think about government as a partner. I know that might feel oxymoronic to all of you, but you are often dealing with locally defined challenges and solutions, and even the federal government needs to adopt a partner posture in problem solving. Not top down, but bottom up. At a time when speed is important and getting you the resources you need as quickly as possible is indeed important. You all know this and you're feeling it now. Systems are not designed for speed, and often lots of missteps happen when we go fast. When missteps happen, there are public consequences, and the public sector can overcorrect. So I encourage you to demand smart and timely decisions. Lastly, believe that equity matters, even as a small business. Across all of the initiatives, keep a keen eye on equity and access to opportunity. What do I mean by that? Who's benefiting or not? Is the system designed to benefit larger companies and institutions? And how can you shine a light on the beauty and necessity, as Ed mentioned, of being small? As you lean into place as a small business and work with your public sector partners, let me invite you to think about 5 themes. I call them my 5 R's. Remember about role confusion and conflation. We are all used to being in our own lanes, whether sectoral or otherwise, and the work of creating opportunity in place is messy. And we have to tolerate some lane collisions and some traffic jams. It's happening now, it's going to continue to happen. Remember role. Secondly, responsibilities. When you are silo busting, as this work requires, you will have folks who talk about, that's not my job, or that is my job. So turf comes into play when you're working with the public sector, and we need a better way to come to shared responsibilities and accountabilities. Thirdly, resources. We're all looking at each other now and pointing fingers for where the resources are going to be coming from. The public sector looks to the private sector and vice versa. We believe the private sector should fund things because the public sector can't. We need a conversation about more efficient and effective uses of resources across the sectors and the most sustainable path for them. Fourth, results. Even in these times, you need to perform. Without results, it's hard to make good policy. The more you can think about shared results where you're working with partners, the better. And lastly, risk. Lee spoke about risk, others have spoken about risk. Who assumes the risk between the sectors and between the different roles? Is too much risk being assumed by one party over another? How do we manage, mitigate, and assign risk behavior? We don't talk about risk often enough. We need to talk about risks increasingly more and more. I look forward to our discussion, and I hand it back to you, Sandy.
Thank you so much, Alan. Really good points, your 5 R's. We'll hang on to those. Guys, I'm going to start with a few questions that have come in already. And if you've got questions, keep them coming. We've got a good 20 minutes or so to go with questioning, and we will go right up to the minute with it. First question, I think is best for you, Carwin. In this climate, what do small businesses need to do in order to pique the interest of investors to invest in them?
Sure. And I spend a good, we manage $200 million. So I spend a fair amount of my time making investment decisions. So I'll address this as from the standpoint of an investor. So the bad news is in times like these, and again, I lived through the 2008, 2010 recession as well. Risk is a big issue. Capital markets, investors hate risk, they hate uncertainty. And right now there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Is your state going to open? Is it not going to open? Is the manufacturing facility you're being asked to invest in going to have an outbreak of COVID and have to close down for 3 weeks? From the standpoint of an investor, your investor would rather sort of sit on the sidelines for the next 6 months and see how you do. And if you're still around and you still need the money, make that investment at that point rather than today when there's so much uncertainty. So first thing is, as a business owner, you need to understand that and you need to address those concerns. You always want to address risks, but now it's particularly important. So you want to show that you understand, you've totally thought through the issues, the risk issues that your business faces, what could go wrong, and that you have and are able to address and mitigate those risks so that the investor is willing to take a risk with you because you're being smart about the risks that you face. The second is still, I think you're still running into this. Well, I'd just rather wait and let things shake out for a while. And of course, you're in a position right now where you need the money now, right? You've got to meet your pay for roll. You have this terrific opportunity to make hitches for RVs that you need money for, and you don't have the cash. So things are very urgent for you. For the investor, they're not. So another great thing, if you can do it, is to communicate some sense of urgency, which for an investor means a sense of opportunity. I'll give you an example, and often what you'll want to do is think about, what are your strengths, what capacities do you bring to the table, and how might you pivot so that you can actually take advantage of new opportunities, particularly when perhaps your old business plan is foreclosed. And I'll give you an opportunity of another business we're involved with. It's called Farmer's Fridge. You can go online now and order some salads. I strongly urge you to do so. Their original business plan was to put vending machines in big office buildings with fresh farmer produce. Obviously, that's not working very well right now because the big office buildings are all closed. So they quickly pivoted and went online and took some of that same fresh produce and are now selling high quality fresh salads and rice bowls and things like that through the internet. And what they've done a good job of, I think, is not only executing on that plan very, very rapidly, pivoting, but also being able to communicate a sense of urgency and opportunity to investors.
Carwin, thank you so much. Put on your belt, display rather, your belt and your suspenders early, and make certain that you show urgency equals opportunity. Did I get the key points?
I think you got it.
All right. Next question is up for you, Lee. And here it is. Rural small businesses have been particularly impacted by COVID after already struggling to recover from the Great Recession. What kinds of solutions should they be investigating now with the second half of this double whammy?
Oh, thank you very much for the question. I think it's very insightful to look at that. And it's also, I think, important to note that while um, some areas of the country in rural areas in particularly might not have been affected the same way as our urban partners by the public health, everyone has been affected economically. So that economic impact is unique and really widespread. And it really depends on the industry sector that you're in, again, whether it's manufacturing or agribusiness or healthcare, as a small or a service provider or small sector. Some of the solutions that you should be investigating, and Kerwin brought this up too, when you talk about looking at your capital and looking at how do I prepare myself for investment. This is across the board, even not in an emergent time like we have right now. But make sure that you are focused on your business plan, your process. Look at your policies, especially right now. Look at your policies. Your employees are key, and having a safe workplace is key. And just as you would follow OSHA and just as you would follow other guidelines, just make sure that you're aware and educated about the health process of that. But you also, when you look at your policies and you look at your business plan, you have to take a very real perspective with yourself on your business priorities. How can you develop new markets? Where is opportunity? Where are risks in your supply chain? And if you have all those documented, that's very helpful too. Because you can go back and you can look at that, and it's not set in stone, but it gives you an opportunity to be able to communicate effectively with the employees that want to build product, come to work, do what they're tasked to do. And it makes it very clear to them. I think your opportunities, you always have to look at markets, no matter when and where you live as a business, where you are in your business evolution. You have to look at your markets to see where are my strengths, where are my opportunities, where's that growth. And most particularly now, look for efficiencies. Where are my efficiencies at? Where are cost savings at? There's a lot of, for small business in rural areas, there's a lot of pressure as the business owner. If you're headquartered in that community, you get pressure from your employee base, you get pressure from your community, you get pressure from the municipalities. And not only that, you own that that pressure from yourself too to be able to succeed. So you have to define success, and as Kerwin says, be able to pivot and move towards that, because it's at the end of the day, it's about business operations. And then finally, look at that capital reserve. A firm like Advantage Capital, or as Advantage Capital, they understand the growth and the components that are involved in making sure that you are healthy and successful in the evolution of that business, and having access to the public resources as well as private capital and private resources, I think is key. So educate yourself. But the primary opportunity and the solution, as I think Solon said, we don't have the silver bullet, but from a practical perspective, if you're aware of what's going on around you, be safe. Make sure your employees understand the communications plan, and then take advantage of opportunity where opportunity lives.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you very much. Some very, very salient points there. Again, I'm going to move over. I'm going to go out of line a little bit because we got a question that came live. I want to make certain that we get it. It came just in the last few minutes, and the other ones came a little bit earlier before we got on live. How can we create and make relationships when you can't physically meet? And that's to the whole panel. But I'm gonna ask you guys to just be swift.
One of the things and how I was going to answer that is we have to learn how to use social media these days. I think that without making this sound too rote, social media is really the way that we're all communicating these days, not just on Zoom calls, but also getting to know people. I can say that I'll be real swift here, Sandy. I would say about 12 or 13 years ago, I was not heavily involved in social media because I was actually a public figure, and there was no reason for me to be on social media. And when I left that position, I had to build a business. I had 400 people on LinkedIn. Now I have almost 30,000. And I had to build my network. And so I make a majority of my appointments, even before these times, through social media. So I say that we have to learn those skills today of embracing technology any way that we can. And I think they've made technology really easy to get to meet people that we don't know.
All right, I'll take one more response to that general question. How can you create and make relationships when we can't meet people? We can't physically meet them. How are you doing deals, Kerwin, when you can't meet people?
Well, as Ed just said, we make lots of use of video conferences, and I think also you just have to make a greater effort to go out and well, meet people if you will, but contact people and set up opportunities to meet face to face on Zoom. I find, frankly, that a Zoom call where you can spend an hour really looking in the person's eyes is close to as effective as being in person. But I think you have to do that more. And then the other thing, and I've in our staff meetings, we've discussed this with our staff, and I posed this question, what are we missing here? We're doing a pretty good job holding staff meetings and getting due diligence memos written and things like that, but what are we missing? And what people identified was just the informal relationships, the chance discussions in the hallway or over lunch, things like that. So we've made a concerted effort now, rather than basically answering all questions by email. We'll say, let's hop on Zoom, or in our case, let's hop on Microsoft Teams, and create that opportunity for those sort of chance discussions.
Good advice. Good advice. And we all learn to manage the mute button in the process, right? This next question I'm going to direct to you, Salon. Beyond the general constraints that we've heard across the panelists today, what are specific COVID-19 restraints for a small growing business?
Sandy, I'm probably not going to be revolutionary here. I'm going to reiterate some of the themes that have already come up. I'll reiterate one that Lee just mentioned here, and I probably feel obligated to say, which is that public health is economic health. And so as much as we can to be able to get this virus under control and to do our duty, either as a small business owner or a member of the community, to be able to do that. Having said that, I would say a moment ago, you heard Kerwin give the example of a physical location. And I think for those who are physically bound in terms of their business, they rely upon the location. The premium placed on physical location and the lack of users and visitors is pretty unique for COVID, and given the nature of the public health crisis, and obviously is a huge constraint that is being placed on folks. Those small businesses who are trying to leverage not only the physical environment and retrofit their physical environment to comply with local COVID regulations, but also introducing or expanding their virtual and technology aspects of their business and the costs and capacities required to switch to virtual models. We heard Ed a moment ago talk about how that conversion from in-person to virtual is something that we all need to innovate around, but it takes cost and capacity. I know that the opening and closing of the economy and the ongoing unease for people to be in close proximity, given COVID, is just a tough challenge for us. And given the ups and downs of COVID right now, is probably going to continue to feel like a challenge, both for the regulatory environment, but also for the small business who is trying to figure out what's the best thing to do for the community and for themselves. Efforts to taken to grow the business that might run counter to what is best for public health, meaning where your business requires at some level a level of proximity and traffic. You could imagine that's really tough. Those businesses that have required a level of density, I think that's going to be tough. And then I would just say, we're at a time where we don't know enough yet about COVID. And so what it means to be in compliance, what it means to be safe during a time we're still discovering the nature of this disease is the height of uncertainty. And Kerwin talked about what it means to live in uncertain times. I think that's part of the uniqueness of living with COVID.
Thank you, Salin. And I would just add quickly that we can't say those things enough, that these are particular constraints of the COVID-19 pandemic that business and finance and government and philanthropy appropriately have got to keep their eye on. Business and finance for sure. We got questions coming in furiously. Bill asked, is there a difference in risk uncertainty across industries you would consider investing in, such as, is there a difference that you can see in risk and uncertainty in manufacturing versus transportation, or transportation versus technology? I'm going to pop that back over to you, Kerwin. You and Ed, if you all
Sure.
split it. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the questioner mentioned manufacturing. I think there, the big issue is, the virus hitting your workforce, hitting your production facility. So yes, the risks certainly vary. And I think as an investor, you want to sort of drill down to precisely what is the production process, the sales process, who are the customers. And I think another thing that's coming, unfortunately, that we have to think about is right now we're focused on those immediate physical threats, right? That, you run a restaurant and you can't have people in your restaurant because of the virus. You run a manufacturing plant and you have to worry about social distancing, and you have to worry about closing down the manufacturing plant. There's a second order effect coming, and it will probably last for the next 10 plus years, which is that there will be less money in our economy as people lose jobs in restaurants and in entertainment. They will have less money to buy goods and services from other businesses. So there will be a spiral down, and one job of the public sector is to try to reverse that spiral down and get our engine back going. And of course, the problem right now is we're in this in-between land of on the one hand wanting to get that started, and on the other hand really needing to put our economy back in a deep freeze and depressing our economy so that the virus doesn't spread. And I totally agree with what others said, which is ultimately this is a public health problem. We have to solve our public health problem before we can solve our economic problem. And if we try to get the economic engine going too soon, our public health problem will take over and quash the economy.
Thank you, Kerwin. We are approaching the hour, and it's been a wonderful discussion. We've got time for one final comment, and I'm going to, and based on the questions we have, I'm going to bounce it to you, Salin, and give you 45 seconds to give us a nice closing effort. At the present time, all eyes are on the federal government, on what they can do to bail out small businesses. What's the role, as you have observed it, of state governments and legislatures in helping with a long-term recovery?
Sandy, thank you for the question. In my 30 to 45 seconds, here's what I would tell you. Our governance structure in the United States over a range of policies was intended to work at multiple levels, federal, state, and local. Most authorities, not all, but most authorities devolve to states and localities. Few authorities in the United States are really centralized to federal, and we've done that for particular reasons. We have lots of variation and variability. Federal government usually does not do an end around but as we've seen now, has the capacity to fund directly. But if the capacity to fund or implement is weak at the states, it's going to cause implementation and accountability issues for businesses on the ground. So even as we're keeping our eye focused on the feds, I would say from my own experience, the system only works if all levels of the system work. And if there's going to be one level that will break down, it's going to affect small businesses. So we need to keep our eye on all aspects of the prize.
A role for state and local governments in this 360-degree recovery that we are advocating for. On that, we will close. Thank you very much. I'm turning it back to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And thank you to our panelists and to each of you, our attendees. If you'd like further information on Advantage Capital or any of today's panelists or their companies, please feel free to contact myself, Mark Scheffel, or my colleague, Lacey Biles, and our contact information is available here on the screen. Thank you for your participation today, and this concludes today's Advantage Capital webinar, a 360-degree look at growing small business in a COVID-19 world. Thank you.
Well,